Go. So 1,917 of Sheridan students, or 8.5% of the student body,
Mm.
officially withdrew from their programs following the strike. What kind of impression do you think that leaves for the current faculty and student body of Sheridan? And what sort of message or a long lasting moral do you think that leaves behind?
Well, I think we all have different perspectives on how everything unfolded, and those are the total numbers for the whole school, and I don't dispute them at all. But I've heard anecdotally that different faculties have very different numbers, right? And so I teach in FAD. I teach in the Faculty of Animation Arts and Design, and we've heard that in FAD we had very few students drop. I think in animation and illustration, I think they had zero students. I think in art fundamentals we had probably about 5% of our students drop. But that's not an insignificant number, but it wasn't huge, right? I've heard that the vast majority of the students who dropped were in the business schools, and I can't say with any certainty, but just kind of anecdotally, that's what I heard. It's a huge impact, and let's not understate the fact that the whole thing sucked for everybody involved, right? And there's nothing good from a student's perspective, right? We as a faculty, we as a union, we're looking long term, right? We're looking at our working environment as an opportunity to make changes for the better, and along the way, it's going to impact people, and so I don't doubt that there were a lot of negative outcomes that came from it. I there was a lot of parts of it that I didn't like myself, and I supported the strike, absolutely, but at the same time, I really feel for the students. I work with the students. I interact with them. I'm friends with them, and I don't want to see anyone, dropping out or anything like that. But I think it I can only speak from the students that I've interacted with, and I think it says a lot about art students. I think in the arts we know adversity. We know what it's like to struggle to get the things that you want, the things that you need, right? And I think if the numbers are true, the vast majority of the dropouts came from the business sector, I think that kind of makes sense. I think in business, you work in something that makes sense until it doesn't make sense, and then you move on to something else. And that might just be a different kind of mentality for people that go into the arts or go into business courses, right? But I think in the arts, I think we know adversity, and we persevere through it. And I didn't have that much of a drop off in terms of the numbers in my classrooms or anything like that. So, it's difficult for me to speak to that. I don't doubt that there was a lot of people upset, and I don't doubt that it affected a lot of people in a negative way. But I can't really personally speak to those kind of numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As a faculty member, you were out there protesting for 5 weeks, both in October and November.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the most difficult aspects or obstacles that you had to overcome, both personally and as part of the faculty, and in order to do what you did for so long for the sake of a better working conditions and a better contract?
Yeah, you sent me these questions ahead of time, and I appreciate you doing that. I've been thinking about this one, and I think that this was very much something that it's been a few months, right, since it happened, and so I kind of have to revisit a lot of these feelings and a lot of what was going on. And I think something that was very present in my mind at the time was the fact that I'm a full-time faculty, and I completely recognize the position that I have and the place that I have that I am within this college, and my life is pretty good, right? I make good money. I have good benefits. I'm working towards a pension, and all of that is really good, really great. The fact of the whole everything around the strike, though, is that 80% of the people that I work with don't have it as good as I do, right? And the way I see it, maybe this sounds altruistic, maybe this sounds, silly, but I think that with privilege um, comes responsibility. I recognize my privilege. I recognize how good I have it. I also recognize that 80% of the people that I work with don't have the same privileges that I do. 80% of the people that I work with don't have job security. They have to reapply for their jobs every 4 months. They don't have the benefits that I do. They are not working towards a pension, and all of this kind of job security stuff. And so I gladly went on strike, but it wasn't for me, right?
Yeah.
It was for my colleagues. That was hard at home. That's a hard pill to swallow, when the vast majority of us that were out on the picket lines were full-time faculty. That's difficult. That's a really hard thing. All that being said, too, Sheridan was in a unique situation in terms of all of the different colleges, because we at Sheridan have it better than a lot of the other colleges do. We have a higher enrollment. It's a bigger school. And a lot of the numbers, like I say 80% of my colleagues, that's province-wide. I think the numbers at Sheridan are something more like 60-40, in terms of 60% of our content is delivered by part-time faculty as opposed to 80% province-wide, right? So a lot of times the other colleges were kind of putting Sheridan up there as the model that they were trying to achieve. We have a Senate here. A lot of schools are trying to get a Senate implemented at their schools, So it's kind of like we're privileged at Sheridan, and I'm amongst a privileged few at that privileged school. So I'm kind of like, I recognize the privilege that I have. I recognize that I've got it really good in the system. But with that, I also, I taught part-time for 10 years before I came on full-time. And I know those struggles, and I know that lack of security, right? And I think that it was important that we do that fight, that we fight that fight. And I think it was worth it in the end. Was it difficult financially? Absolutely. Was it difficult on the home front personally? Absolutely. I'm glad it ended when it did. I wish it could have ended much sooner, in the end, I think, and in the end, after a few weeks went by and the arbitration process went through, we ended up getting most everything that we were fighting for. So that also speaks to me that it was a fight worth fighting, because the arbitrator saw it from our perspective also.
Okay, thanks. What insight can you give regarding how the contract issue started, and what were the conditions that weren't agreed upon, et cetera, and that sort of thing?
I don't remember all the details at this point. I do remember that there was a lot of talk ahead of time with any strike. I mean, I taught part-time at York University before, while I was also teaching part-time here at Sheridan, and I experienced a strike there also. And I remember that all of these things are they're in the peripheral. You hear about them, you hear about the possibility of it happening, but it doesn't necessarily affect you in your day-to-day, and so you don't really pay attention until all of a sudden it's like, hey guys, this could be happening next week, right? Or this could be happening within the next couple of weeks, and that's when you kind of wake up and go, oh my god, what's going on, right? And you kind of wake up to it all. I remember that there was a strike mandate vote where it was how the union needs to use that as leverage. So they ask their membership to give them the strike mandate. It's not a vote to go on strike, but it's a vote that says, if you don't sit down with us and meet with us, we're willing to go on strike. And I remember that had overwhelming approval and backing by the faculty and by the staff here. And so that was kind of the leading up to it. I was aware of a few of the issues when the strike started. It wasn't until we were out there and I was talking with my colleagues that I really found out what all of the issues were. But again, as privileged as we are here at Sheridan, there's a lot of these issues that affect in union speak, they always say our brothers and sisters, our union members, right? And I learned a lot about the conditions that we take for granted maybe here at Sheridan that other schools don't have, right? And so I was awoken to a lot of those issues as the strike went on, certainly, and became more educated and more aware of it as the weeks progressed through the conversations I was having with people. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the crunch semester time because of the strike? What was it like having to restructure the winter semester to accommodate the student body?
You know, it's interesting because I can't speak for other faculties. Again, I can only speak for FAD, but in the programs that I teach in art fundamentals and visual and creative arts, we've only shortened the semester by 1 week. So in the long run, the fall semester was meant to be a 14-week semester. We ended up delivering 13 weeks of content. There was a 5-week gap in the middle, but it was extended into January. The winter semester, again, it's meant to be a 14-week semester, but it's been compressed into 13 weeks. The irony is the way that I structure my own classes. I always had their final projects due in week 13, so that I could grade them and hand them back in the final week of school, and they would have less deadlines that week. So it didn't really impact me at all, and it certainly doesn't impact the content that I'm delivering, because I'm delivering it in the same time frame. I think the biggest impact, though, is the intangible. You know, we can say we're delivering all the content just like we promised we would, but that doesn't take into consideration the start and stop of that fall semester, right? Especially teaching in a first-year program, teaching in a 1-year program where a lot of these students are coming in straight out of high school. They had 4 weeks of post-secondary. They then had that pulled away from them, so they were just starting to build a momentum of feeling what it's like to be in post-secondary school, and then that's pulled out from under them, and then they have to sit for 5 weeks. And then they come back and they say, okay, let's ramp up again. And it takes them several weeks to get into that, and then it's the Christmas break, right? And then they come back from Christmas and they got to finish all their final assignments, and in our program they're worrying about their portfolio for the next year. And what I found this year was that there was a lot more lack of ability to deal with that from the students than I've ever experienced in the past. You know, just because the momentum kept getting taken away from them, there was a lot more of the, not being able to build on what they had, and that's really unfortunate. You know, I think that was the biggest thing, that the students this year didn't get the same experience as they would have if it was all in a 14-week straight semester with that big gap in the middle. There's an emotional toll that's taken, right? And you can't take that back. In the end, we delivered just as much content as they would have had otherwise, but emotionally, it was much more of a roller coaster, and I think a lot of students struggled with that. I had a lot of students that didn't do as well in the fall term, I know, as they would have done any other year because of the start and stop. And I have students this semester who are still struggling, you know, and you know, in a way, almost kind of still using that as an excuse, you know, which is unfortunate because it's not really affecting them any longer, but there's still this kind of malaise, there's this kind of feeling like there are things being done to them that are out of their control, right? And it's a really unfortunate life lesson for a lot of our students, that you're going to deal with adversity in your life, and how you deal with that adversity is how you're going to deal with life, right? And I think there's been a lot of learning that's happened this year outside of the classroom because of all this, and it's had a negative effect. But I think in the long run, I think a lot of our students will find that having survived this year, they can survive anything, right? And hopefully the next program that they get into, because our year is just a 1-year program where they're building up to get into the next program, they're going to be able to handle that next program even that much more, because there's going to be less of this adversity, as they move forward.
Yeah. Thank you.